My name is Steve Hoxa, and I am involved with Health, Dunn, and White. And for those of you who think, I've got a couple more. Maya, if you would just sign in, please. Come up and sit a little. No, it will. I will. Okay, do a reset. My name is Steve Hoxa, and I am here representing Health Done Right. And Health Done Right is composed of 5 different groups. There was a survey done back in 2019 for the community, the Dunn County community, to assess the needs of health in the community. And there were 5 areas that were deemed worth focusing on. One was chronic health, one was alcohol, drug, and nicotine. One was housing, health and environmental action. That's what this group is about. And what's the fifth one? Mental health. Explain it. And so, as part of our heat team, our environmental team, we've been meeting now for, well, going on year 4 into year 4. And one of the efforts that we're focusing on heavily has to do with water. And so the event today is going to be related to health of land and water. So we talked about this maybe 2 months ago, and Maureen Vedder, who has been heading up community conversations, we thought, it would be good if we had Maureen involved, and she has these monthly meetings, and she would help us with the presentation and have it at the library. Well, to get the library on the Saturday is not, there's some logistics involved. So the bottom line is, we ended up talking with the museum, and we're presenting it here, so it's a joint effort, if you will, between our heat group and community conversations. So we asked you all to sign in, and Steve Hansen is recording this today. And just as a piece of information, Steve is also a member of HEAT. Sue Sexton is also a member of HEAT. Liz Osborne and Dick Labers. And I think I've got everybody who was a HEAT member today. So that's kind of the background. And we asked Chase, who's also very important today especially. And so we asked Chase if you would give a presentation on land and water conservation. He is the county conservationist for Dunn County. He is the department head. And so I'm going to turn it over to him, and he can give you a little more background. So, Chase Cummings.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Happy Earth Day.
Yeah. I wanted to say one thing. I got in my email, every morning in my email, I get one of these things on this day in history. And it had to do with Earth Day. So What year was the first earthquake? 1970. What day of the week was it? It was a Wednesday. Do you know how many people in America participated in the first earthquake? Take a stab. 20 million. And to this day, it is the largest gathering of people around the nation taking part in various environmental activities. I was astonished. 20 million people, universities and small communities and big cities, and they gathered all around and did all kinds of things in their own way. They learned, they participated, and they made waves, and took actions. But it just happened to be that this presentation wasn't designed to be earthquakes, it worked out. Anyway.
Well, we got a couple of my slides out of the way now, so.
Chase, could you use the microphone, please?
I can use the microphone.
Talk softly or loud? Okay. All right. So yeah, welcome today. Thank you for having me. HEAT, Community Conversations. As Steve said, my name is Chase Cummings. I'm the County Conservationist with the Dunn County Land and Water Conservation Division. Happy to be here today to kind of help talk about what the Land and Water Conservation Division does for here in Dunn County, how we came to exist. First, a little more background on me. And we'll do a little time travel just to try to go back through history and review how we got to where we are presently today and how the Land and Water Conservation Division exists. We'll talk a little bit about the programs that we have here in Dunn County, who we're involved with and who we work with, some of the tremendous partners that we have on a daily basis, and then look at some, briefly, might take up more time than planned, but talk about some of the resource challenges as well as some of the successes that I think we have here in Dunn County. And then a little bit of, hopefully, as we head out the door, thinking about Earthly, a little bit of optimism for the future. So who am I? I am a kid from Central Sands, central part of Wisconsin. I grew up in a town, unincorporated town, known as Bancroft, Wisconsin. It is a census-designated place, is what my definition is. I hope you have a loss of words of how to describe it. So it is recognized. There's about 535 people there. And that red star, let's see if this works here. You can see that red star there. That's where my house was where I grew up. So just on the southern edge of Portage County, northwest corner of Sheriff County, and the northeast corner of Adams County. I went to school in Plainfield. The name of my high school was Tri-County, and you can kind of see why I was almost ready to get in. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Central Sands, but certainly there's a lot of attention that's drawn to that part of the state throughout history, but in recent years too, particularly talking about groundwater quality and some other environmental resource issues and concerns there. And we can touch base on some of that. Anybody know what this bird is up here? It's a greater prairie chicken. So I grew up on the southern edge of the Buena Vista grasslands, or as we locals called it, the birdland. And I had the opportunity to probably not fully appreciate the greater prairie chicken growing up. It wasn't until probably later high school and into college when I realized what type of a resource I had in my backyard that never really, I guess, appreciated for that value. I appreciate it for other values, hunting, deer hunting. My parents, my grandparents, we lived just down the road. They had a small farm. That's where they raised my dad. He was the youngest of 6, and they used to make hay on the bird land, so cut marsh hay. So also in the Central Sands is potato and vegetable country. So down here in the lower right corner, obviously center pivot irrigation, sandy ground. We were surrounded by center pivots. Lots of high production agriculture, high commodity, potato, vegetable, snap beans, green peas, carrots. Some of the largest carrot producers are in that area as well. My grandparents on my dad's side, like I said, farmed. They settled that area in the early 1900s. And my grandparents on my mom's side, they were tavern owners in Elman, Wisconsin, which is right here. So I guess basically growing up, I had the privilege of knowing what hard work was. My parents ended up, they were both self-employed. My dad did not step into the agricultural world, but he was a home builder, owned his own home business. So I grew up pouring concrete, shingling, building houses. So my mom was self-employed as well. She was had an in-home salon, cut hair for a living. And, so I had an appreciation for the guidance and leadership they gave for kind of being a self-starter. One of my dad's common phrases always is, he always talked about Vince Lombardi time. Anybody know what Vince Lombardi time is? Dick knows what it is. If you're 5 minutes early, you're already 10 minutes late. So I've found at times throughout my life so far that it's easier said than done, but I always try to kind of live by that, is be prepared and be ready for what's up ahead. I would say that, going back to that hard work, and that kind of that work ethic, led me to a number of things. Part of my experience in Tri-County was we had a wonderful school forest program, and I had the privilege of experiencing that from my kindergarten years all the way through my senior year in high school. We had about I think it was 1992 was the first environmental ed counselor program where actual students in the school got to teach other students in the school about the environment, conservation, and things like that. So I got to experience the learning end of that as well as the educating side of it. So my junior and senior year in high school, I was an environmental ed counselor. And we spent almost an entire summer between my sophomore and junior year learning about the school forest. So the Tri-County School Forest is here. That's near Hancock, Wisconsin. And it provided a tremendous resource for us students in that school to make a connection with the surrounding environment. And I think that helped kind of spring me into my interest in being outside and natural resources above and beyond just hunting and fishing and I guess the connection with agriculture. Anybody know what that bird is there? It's an American kestrel. So that same summer that I was learning the ropes of the school forest, I had the privilege, a fellow student and I were banding kestrels for out on the Buena Vista Marsh. So in addition to prairie chickens, there was quite a program about restoring and managing birds of prey, and the American kestrel was one of them. That was basically following up on work initially started by Fran Hammerstrom. Everybody know who Fran Hammerstrom is? So Fran was an American writer, basically. She grew up, but her home was about 2 miles as a crow flies from where I was. It was a pre-Civil War home, still there today. But she was a writer and a strong conservationist in that, basically 60s, 70s, 80s era. And very, very well known within the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point and her connections with some of the conservation she had done in the Central Sands. So I didn't travel too far from home, went just north 25 miles and went to school after high school, went to college in Stevens Point. I got a Bachelor of Science degree in Soil and Land Management, and that exposed me to a lot of things. The one thing that I did not know going into college and pretty much almost my entire college career was what I was going to do. I had no idea. Some days I didn't think I knew what I'm doing, but really I didn't have a goal in mind. I knew I wanted to be outside. I knew I wanted to be connected with conservation in some way. I had a little bit of passion for agriculture, but didn't really have the ability to get into that. And even today, it's even harder. So I went through my college years not really fully understanding how I might apply some of those principles I was learning. My first summer between high school and college, I had a job. Anybody know what? Oh boy. I'll spoil it for you. Anybody know what crop this is here? It's potatoes, yep. So Central Sands, as I mentioned before, some of the top 100 potato producers in the country were right in the Central Sands. And I had connections, family connections, through growing up, that I was a crop scout for about 3 summers, 3 growing seasons, starting out my first year in college and going through a couple of years. I scouted and I walked about 5,000 acres of potatoes every week. So if you thought I was lean, I'm lean now. I was pretty lean back then. But that was a good experience. It showed me a lot of things beyond what I probably realized at the time. But I learned a lot about production agriculture. I learned a lot about conservation ethic through different points of view. And I think I've taken that, hopefully, applying that knowledge every day. My last 2 years in college, I had the opportunity to work for letters, this couple stacks of paper, a couple reams of paper. Worked for Storenzo Paper Mill. So that was originally Consolidated Paper in Wisconsin Rapids. And I was the manager of their land application program. So beneficial reuse of their, basically, biosolids that would come out of their wastewater treatment plant. I had no idea what I was doing when I got into that internship. But growing up in the area, I had a lot of connections with farmers, and I turned it into a fairly successful program. It's based on the relationships that I springboarded off from what my parents and grandparents probably started. But I ended up taking a semester off of school and working for that company, and basically working with landowners to land apply those biosolids. I know more about biosolids now than I did then, and my points of view certainly shift back and forth. But certainly it's a beneficial reuse at the time, and it was either that or put it into the landfill. So we can get into a lot of that stuff later. But the point is that it helped pay for my college. It was a really well-paying job, got me through school, exposed me to some other private sector industry type experience. After college, I graduated from college, and I certainly had a desire to stay close to home, but I also wanted to see something different. And I wasn't afraid to, I guess, look longer, and I took a position as the county feedlot officer in Todd County, Minnesota. That was in 2006, and in the 2.5 years I was there, I moved up a little bit to end up becoming a zoning coordinator in that amount of time. So I started out working primarily with livestock operations, helping them to achieve water quality goals, maintain compliance with local and state resources or requirements, and building relationships with people you don't know sometimes is easier than the people that you do know. So I took advantage of kind of going on my own and making a name for myself on my own and not having it precede me where I would have been when I was staying at home. I really found a lot of value in that job in Todd County. I was through the zoning portion of it, and I ended up administering and was the lead person for all Board of Adjustments, so all zoning related activities from variances, special exception requests. And in Todd County, there's 243 lakes in the county. And those lake shore owners typically came up from St. Cloud or the Twin Cities. And as humans we are, we want the biggest and best things in the smallest areas sometimes possible, or sometimes the most fragile areas. So shoreline was a huge thing, and I got some pretty thick skin out of that deal. Trial by fire, learning on the fly, trying to implement ordinances and understand the rules and relay those to individuals that might not want to follow those rules. So early on trying to figure out how to build relationships, make connections, understanding points of view has been more evident now that I started in my career, I should say. After 2.5 years, I came to Putnam County, the largest county in the state of Wisconsin. While it's not the largest, by land mass, it's not the smallest either. Wazaki County, I think, is actually a little bit smaller based on land mass. But even though there's only 8 townships in Putnam County, the conservation need there and the workload is comparable, I would say, to most counties in the Driftless area, the western part of the state. We had low capacity, we had low numbers of staff, but I feel like we did a lot of good work, and there was a lot of good work done prior to me, and there still is a lot of good work being done there. I spent 12 years in Putnam County as a county conservationist there. Everywhere from learning the conservation mission and methods in Wisconsin. I had been in Wisconsin almost my entire life and never really understood what a land and water conservation department was, what NRCS was, what some of the DNR even did. It was always a different perspective growing up than what I was exposed to now. And so I kind of had to learn a little bit the new system. I was used to the Minnesota system, which is very similar, but Wisconsin was trying to reacquaint to what Wisconsin has to offer. And we'll get into some of that, the history on that here in a minute. But Putnam County was good to me. I didn't necessarily want to leave there. I had a lot of good things going. I was starting to get a little bit comfortable. Programs were running well, making good progress. But then an opportunity arose here, and here I am in Dunn County here the last 2 years. So we'll touch base on a lot of that here in a minute. But let's go back in time a little bit. Anybody recognize this picture in the upper left? It's not a snowstorm. That is the Dust Bowl. This picture in the upper right is part of the Coon Creek watershed. And that is the nation's first watershed project. That's basically came off the heels of the Dust Bowl. Hugh Hammond Bennett, the leader of the Soil Conservation Service, the first Soil Conservation Service in the nation. And I also have this gentleman here. I know you can't read that, but you might recognize him. It's all the Leopold. And I'm just going to point out this quote a little bit. The art of land doctoring is being practiced with vigor, but the science of land health is yet to be born. And just keep that in mind as we talk about the rest of the presentation and some of the work that we do. And like I said earlier, happy birthday. I have some fun facts, but I don't remember repeat what Steve said, so that was good. And this gentleman here, recognize that person? Taylor Nelson, right? The founder of Earth Day. So like Steve said, 1970, Earth Day was the first Earth Day, and that was a springboard to a lot of the environmental movement. From the Clean Water Act to OSHA, EPA, a lot of state agencies or federal agencies, and the movement that was behind that. Which has led to a long history of soil and water conservation in the nation. So I mentioned before with Hugh Hammond Bennett and the first watershed project, how that has turned into what it is today. And that's where the Land and Water Conservation Division comes into existence. So first I want to start out with who we are not. And we have very strong partners and partnerships with other agencies that we work with on a daily basis, and we work so close together that many individuals do not know what the Land and Water Conservation Department is or really is. We are DNR, we are the NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is the federal programs for conservation. And in my experience, we've been called many other things too, and we may get a hint of that as we continue the presentation about some of the roles and responsibilities that we have. But while these are all very good people, and like I said, we work closely with them, we are an entity of our own. So, a little bit of that history and timeline again. So, I don't expect you to be able to read all this. I'm probably not go through everything in detail, but between 1939 and 1956 is when a lot of the conservation districts were first formed in every county in the state. They were known as soil and water conservation districts or conservation districts. And that district model is still consistent throughout the nation today, with the exception of Wisconsin. As we fast forward and go through some of the dates here, 1972 was a Clean Water Act, like I mentioned before, springboard off of Earth Day. 1978 is when the state adopted its first farmland preservation program, and I'll touch base on that later as well. 1982 was a big year. So the soil and water conservation district model was consistent throughout the nation, but Wisconsin had to be different, and had to be different for a number of good reasons, pros and cons certainly. Through the state legislature, they adopted State Statute Chapter 92, which created the land conservation committees in every county. So that took the district model, which was a separate model from county government. It was its own entity, and its own elections, own boards, own staff, and rolled that, basically eliminated that opportunity in the state of Wisconsin and rolled it into county government. So within the county government structure, there's a requirement by statute to have a land conservation committee. And that land conservation committee was then responsible for erosion control projects, mainly erosion control and water quality within each county. So in 1984 was some of the first county erosion control plans, and those plans were to try to address erosion and soil loss within each county and within the state. And the big model back then was T by 2000. So T is tolerable soil loss. Every soil type in the nation, every soil type in Wisconsin, every soil type in Dunn County has what's considered a tolerable erosion rate. So it can erode at a rate that's considered tolerable based on a number of factors. And that typically has to do with productivity. How productive is the soil, and how much damage can we do to the soil and be productive but still keep it somewhat for a longer generation. So each soil has a tolerable rate, and it's basically calculated in tons per acre per year. So many of the soils here in Dunn County are anywhere from 5 tons per acre per year can be eroded and be considered tolerable, down to even 3 tons per acre per year can be considered tolerable. So back in 1984, I didn't go back to see any specific data, but my guess at that time is we were eroding soils at, quadruple the tolerable rate, if not more, maybe even hundreds of tons of soil per year in some situations. So to get to T, or what is considered tolerable by the year 2000, there's certainly different perspectives on that as well, whether that was achievable or not. I think in general, based on the work that we have and the data that we have, is in Dunn County, we accomplished that. We are meeting what is considered tolerable as was planned. 1984 was another big year from a federal standpoint, and that was the 1984 Federal Farm Bill, and that put into some of the first protections through that agency on wetlands. So looking at the time of the 1984 Farm Bill was passed, wetlands became, we started to look at it differently from the farm programs. A lot of drainage, ditching, tiling, trying to get water off the landscape was proven to be not a wise decision. For any wetlands that were prior converted at that time were going to be, those practices on the land would be allowed to exist. But any new wetland conversions, any new impacts to wetlands were supposed to be looked at with a little bit more scrutiny, and in the ideal world would not be impacted at all. The next big date here, 2002. So in 2002, the state legislature I implemented an administrative rule package looking at agricultural performance standards and prohibitions, and they adopted Administrative Code NR 151. So that's the state runoff code. It looks at, as it pertains particularly to here, what we have effective in Dunn County is primarily agriculture. There is a component to urban and you were required to operate those facilities and those operations in accordance with the new agricultural standards, which were farming all land and soils to meet T or tolerable soil loss. A nutrient management rule came in later in effect, but basically there was some hints towards nutrient management planning. Looking at manure management prohibitions, so how would you handle your manure on your farm? Making sure it didn't overtop manure storage structures. Unlimited access to livestock, to streams, and regulating that. There were a number of different components of those agri-performance standards that went into effect in 2002. One of the things we'll get into is those farms that exist prior to 2002, which in many cases are most of our farms. We constantly run into, our work is involved in farms that have been in existence longer than 2002, which is understandable. Very few newer farms and new farmland has been developed since then. But there's several that, and we'll get into the details of that. The other thing I wanted to point out here real quick in history is 1984, Jim Forrester was the first county conservationist in Dunn County. He was a county conservationist until 2008. Unfortunately, he passed away. But prior to that, he was the first conservationist that Dunn County had in this role. I am the third. So in between Jim and I was Dan Prescott, who was in that role as a county conservationist for about 12 years. I believe he was 42 or 43 years in the Land Conservation Department, Dan Prescott was. So there are some big shoes that I have to fill. There's a lot of conservation that's been put on the land prior to me, and I hope to continue that. And with everybody, there's points of view and perspectives and relationships are all different amongst us. So I hope, hopefully I can ensure that of you that I have very similar perspectives as my predecessors, but I also have some different perspectives. And I think that's good for conservation to have things change like that. Okay, back to county government. So this is the Land and Water Conservation Division here in the middle. We are a division of the Environmental Services Department, which that department is one of many departments at the county level. So Dunn County local government structure. We are a division of one of three. There is a county surveyor, is one division, and planning and land use control and planning and zoning is another division. We are in the middle. There are 8 staff in my office, me included. We have 6 conservation planners and a program assistant, Janelle Newcomb, who's a tremendous asset to our department and our division. So I mentioned before, 1982 created the land conservation committees from the soil and water conservation districts. And these individuals on top are the current members of the Land Conservation Committee, also in Dunn County known as the Planning Resources and Development Committee. So there is it was many years ago that the name started to change across the state from Land Conservation Committees. It was Land and Water Conservation Committees. In Dunn County, it was the Planning Resources and Development Committee. Went through some name changes throughout history. But in essence, by statute, we are still required to have a Land Conservation Committee, and these are the members of that. One individual that's listed here as a Farm Service Agency representative. Through the statute, the legislature wanted to maintain a farm or agricultural connection. So they require that on the local land conservation committee, there be a representative from the Farm Service Agency. However, that person doesn't necessarily represent the Farm Service Agency. They represent agriculture. These are the individuals you see county board members make up those committees. It is a committee of the county board. And here is all of us in the Land and Water Conservation Division down here, with some of our various titles. But in general, we are all conservation planners to some degree. Now, I don't expect you to read all this, but I just want to point out a couple things about our mission to sustainably use, enhance, and preserve the natural resources of Dunn County and who we are. The Land and Water Conservation Division is a part of the Environmental Services Department, which works with people in an honest, respectful, and accountable manner to manage land and water resources of Dunn County. And down below here is a bunch of different programs, and we're going to get into those. So I'm going to touch on a lot of these, but this is just the start of the list of all the irons we have in the fire. We are not a department of one task. Like many local departments, we are asked to wear a lot of hats. We are not unique in the Land and Water Conservation Division on that. Many other departments do the same. But in my experience, sometimes we end up being the catch-all. When it can't be assigned somewhere else, we may take it on. So you'll see some things on here on this list, and I'll talk about some things that you might not relate to conservation, but when we really stretch it, we can make a connection. The first one here, this is the cover sheet of our Land and Water Resource Management Plan. So when the legislature created the land conservation committees, and then in 2002 when the Ag Performance Standards came into play, NR 151, another agency, Department of Ag, Trade and Consumer Protection, so DACCAP, was also a player in the connection between the state and the local government, local counties. And DACCAP is a source of funds for the implementation of NR 151. So I mentioned earlier about farms that were in existence prior to 2002. Farms that were in existence prior to that date, if I was to approach those individuals and maybe maybe they had an overtopping of a manure storage structure, or maybe there's some erosion in a field, we need to build a relationship with that individual on what's mentioned in our mission, on an honest, respectful manner. One of the things that we have to do is our enforcement of these rules at the state level is somewhat limited. I can't work with a landowner to implement a project without having to offer them cost share if they are in existence prior to 2002 for that particular practice or whatever particular situation they're in that they might be out of compliance with some of the state rules. So, as I mentioned, DACCAP is the component that helps provide some funding. So, because the state adopted rules, in a way they've delegated those rules for implementation to the Department of Natural Resources, and then the local land conservation departments are the ones that help implement those rules. And in a lot of cases, we do it because we want to, and the county wants to, but we also do it to help out the state in general. The Land and Water Resource Management Plan is a component that's required if you want to obtain funding from the state. So having a Land and Water Resource Management Plan helps identify all the resource concerns. It takes into citizen input as to what those resource concerns are and develops a plan. Typically it's a 10-year plan of how you're going to address those concerns. And having that on file opens us up to getting grant funds from the state for staff and support, as well as cost share funding to help assist those landowners in meeting the new ag performance standards, or new in 2002. I'm not going to be able to read this either, but there is I just want to point out Wisconsin runoff rules, what farmers need to know. So these are the ag performance standards and prohibitions. Administrative Code NR 151. These are some of those things that I mentioned before. So having to meet T or tolerable soil loss, having to have a nutrient management plan, or any nutrients applied to cropland or pasture land must follow the nutrient management plan. Then there's prohibitions as far as how to handle manure. Then there's cost share requirements that are listed in here, how to implement. Through the NR 151 process. We now have those rules in our own code here locally within Dunn County, which provides a number of benefits to helping get conservation implemented. Okay, soil and water resource management grant. So I mentioned the cost share requirements and the funding that's available through the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection. There's also funding available through the Department of Natural Resources. So through the Soil and Water Resource Management Grant, it's an annual grant that we can apply for every year. It's a joint allocation between Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection and the DNR. So just for Dunn County, starting with our most recent Land and Water Resource Management Plan, that cycle, so 2017 to present, we have received about $1.2 million in staff and support from the Department of Ag for assisting and maintaining staff in our office to implement some of these conservation practices. The staff and support is based on 100% of the first position is paid for, 70% of the second position, and 50% of the third position, and 50% of any subsequent positions are to be funded through that requirement. Now, that has never happened. The funding has never been there to fully fund that formula. We have been fortunate in Dunn County to receive 100% of the first position and about 60% of the 70% of the second position. And any positions after that are all either grant funded or come back to the tax levy and the tax burden of the local municipality. Since 2017, our cost share requirements, we have bond funds, so that's basically borrowed money through the state budget, money that's borrowed. We've received about $363,000, almost $364,000 in that time frame to put towards conservation practices on the land. SEG, this is a segregated fund, so this is funds that, a gas tax is an example of a segregated fund, or a tipping fee at a landfill is an example of a segregated fund. So it's funds that may be pulled from other resources and put into something that is either related or can help benefit. And in this case, we've received about just over $200,000 in this last few years for nutrient management. That nutrient management requirement is part of the Ag Performance Standards. And in order, as I mentioned before, a lot of our crop plan has been in existence prior to 2002. So we have to offer cost share in order for us to implement, or I guess enforce, if you will, landowners to follow a nutrient management plan. And based on cost share rates that we're obligated to pay, typically these cost share rates are around 70%. We have to offer 70% cost share. They don't have to accept the cost share, but we have to make the offer. And based on the cost share rates for nutrient management, that $200,000 is equated to about 5,000 new acres of nutrient management plan coverage in the county. Now that's just cost share. There are more farms in the community that are practicing nutrient management, that are implementing nutrient management on their crop land than 5,000 acres. There is actually about 26% of our land right now in Dunn County is covered by a nutrient management plan that is submitted to our office. There are more nutrient management plans out there in the community, they just aren't necessarily turned into us. Concentrated animal feeding operations, for example. Large livestock facilities, or CAFOs as you might refer to them. They are required to have a permit, and they are required to implement and practice nutrient management without being offered cost share. So they cover large tracts of land, so nutrient management is in theory being implemented on a lot of that land that is beyond what we have for our local program here. We've taken the opportunity recently. Sometimes there's counties that aren't able to spend all of their funds, and we've jumped on basically borrowing it or stealing it from them to implement here in Dunn. So a couple other things, part of the cost share that we have available is through the Department of Natural Resources through the Target Runoff Management Program and the Notice of Discharge program grants. So these are situations where we're getting in bond money every year about $50,000 to $60,000 a year. And if you know, have any connections to building anything nowadays, $50,000 to $60,000 doesn't get you very far. Through these other funding sources, they are statewide competitive pools for grants to provide assistance to landowners, particularly farms, to address a runoff issue or a compliance issue with the state's performance standards. We have recently, so effective here this year, 2023, have one notice of discharge grant that we're working with the Department of Natural Resources on to just, actually I should say $796,000, so it's just shy of $800,000. That $800,000 is a portion of the cost for one farm. We have a facility that has had issues with failures of a manure storage structure, discharge. Up to a certain percentage of the cost share. About another $400,000 is coming from the federal government, and there's still a portion of that landowner will have to pay on their own. So they're not getting these practices for free, but as part of the obligation, the way the rules are set up is the cost share is to be offered. And to be honest, if it wasn't for this cost share, and we would continue to see potential for contamination and pollution persist. There's another program, this multi-discharger variance program, MDV. So part of phosphorus reduction goals, so reducing phosphorus in our surface waters, we have point and non-point sources. So everything I've talked about so far is primarily a non-point source. So it doesn't come out of a pipe per se. Where a point source would be a direct discharge to surface water coming from a pipe. So a manufacturing business, industry, a municipality like the city of Menominee would be a point source. Multi-discharger variance program is a way to make a connection between point source pollution basically and non-point source. So cheese factories, municipalities that are required by their permit through the state to reduce their discharge of phosphorus, sometimes that costs lots of money for brick and mortar infrastructure. And while a municipality or a business is trying to figure out what they're going to do to address that new permit requirement, they can pay into a variance program, and it depends on how much phosphorus they need to reduce, but that variance program makes the connection to our non-point rule. So we can apply for these funds and take these dollars that are coming from point sources and put them into non-point work. So reducing phosphorus in a different location. Rather than from a point source, we can do it on the landscaping and non-point work. This is a fairly new program, just in the last few years. And Dunn Cummings taken an opportunity to kind of apply for these funds when available. And so to the tune of about $43,000. And with that said, there's other funding sources through the EQIP program, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, which is a federal program through the Natural Resources Conservation Service or the USDA. And between all of our partners, Department of Natural Resources, DACCAP, us, NRCS, we leverage off of each other to make these projects happen and try to secure as much funding, as much support to achieve the goals of conservation in Dunn County. So, the dollar amounts here might seem a lot to some points of view. They're very little to other points of view. And we do the best we can to try to implement our work with the resources that we have. So, into some of the programs. So I mentioned the Farmland Preservation Program back in previous slide, started in about 1978. That program has evolved over the years into the program that it is today, but it is primarily a mechanism for implementation of conservation practices and for the protection and preservation of farmland. So there are tax credits that are landowners are eligible for, and with the understanding that they will preserve their cropland to continue to be farmland, and they will also meet the soil and water conservation standards or the agri-performance standards. So this map is a little bit difficult to see in here, but the townships in Dunn County, Wilson, Grant, and Lucas all have what's considered farmland preservation zoning or exclusive ag zoning, and they've set their landowners up with the opportunity to participate to the fullest of the farmland preservation program at the state level. And that involves tax credits at roughly around $10 per acre per year. The town of Grant and into Otter Creek and in the surrounding areas into Chippewa County also has what's called an ag enterprise area. So that is another layer of farmland protection, but also creates opportunities for individuals to receive tax credits in that farmland preservation program. So like Otter Creek, for example, they are not a zone town, so they are not eligible for the $7 or the $10 per acre per year tax credit. They're eligible for less than that, about $5 per acre per year. So we have in Dunn County about 64 participants. I did not add up all the acreage, but it's several thousands of acres that are participating in this program. And that is a mechanism, a tool for implementing the agri-performance standards and conservation of the land. Technical assistance. So part of that, if I was to review with a landowner their compliance with the agri-performance standards, we might identify some areas of resource concerns. We have the ability to offer cost share, but also provide technical assistance to help design and implement the best practice for that landowner. Some of the common practices are grass waterways, grade stabilization structures, manure storage closures, then other manure management scenarios, buffers, filter strips, and we'll see how these turn out on this screen here, but kind of click through these a little bit quick. So we have a grade stabilization structure. So basically taking, collecting water, slowing it down, putting it through a pipe behind an embankment, and releasing that water at a rate that isn't going to be as erosive as it would be if it was just during a rain event or a melt event. This is an example of a pipe that's in that structure in the middle of construction. These are anti-seep collars along the pipe, which helps prevent water from running down the pipe next to the pipe and blowing the dam out. So a lot of engineering and technical work involved in these practices. This is a grass waterway. You'll see quite a bit of erosion here, and then through relationship building and working with that landowner, designing a practice, implementing a practice, and keeping them on the land. So that was concentrated flow paths. Areas where common erosion is going to occur will be in stable south, and keep that from entering streams. Another example of some cropland erosion. This is construction of grass waterway with some erosion. Another example of classic gully erosion in the field and what we do to correct that. This is a manure storage abandonment. So we have a number of manure storage structures in the county, across the state that were basically looking at structures that may have been installed without any type of engineering design or any standards at all. We have sites that I've come across where they took a backhoe, dug a hole in the ground, and have been putting manure in it for generations. And depending on those soil types and the locations and the proximity to other resource concerns, the leaking of that manure storage structure could be a problem. In this situation, like on this particular site, we have a concrete structure that was probably put in potentially with some sort of standard at the time, but as you can see in some of this, the walls are cracked, the floor is probably cracked, It's just not a good repair, so we like to abandon those when we can, eliminate that resource concern. That's what it looks like when it's done. Typically, we would not do this if that farm still had manure that generated manure and livestock on site. We want to make sure that we don't create a resource concern by trying to correct another resource concern. This is just a real quick picture of wind erosion. We've been talking a lot about water erosion so far. Wind erosion is still an issue. And then this is, you're not going to be able to see this. I should have thought about this a little bit better, but all those dots on that screen are the projects that we've spent that money on. I mentioned before in the last few years since 2017, where they've been installed on the landscape. Doesn't look like a lot, but that just goes to show you the amount of time, money, and investment it takes to achieve one little step forward, and the resources that are needed. We also get into cropland management. So while we're installing and thinking about hard practices, dams, waterways, stopping immediate erosion, trying to make sure that we address the croplands itself. So we're working with landowners on no-till and soil health, trying to make sure that our cropping practices are sustainable with manner. There's a few videos, I don't think this video is going to play, so I'm going to skip it. So just working with landowners to build relationships on how they manage their cropland. One tool to do that is through the Farmer-Led Watershed program. So Farmer-Led Watershed effort is fairly new in the last decade, and right here in Dunn County was one of the first pilot Farmer-Led Watershed programs in the Hay River within the state. And you can see here, in Dunn County, we have one Farmer-Led Watershed group here. It's known as the Red Cedar Conservation Farmers Farmer-Led Group, and then this is part of the Hay River Farmer-Led Watershed group here. So in 2023, we have about $44,000 in state funds coming back to producers within these farmer-led groups, and they are just truly that, they are farmer-led. So it's an opportunity for farmers to communicate with each other, try new things, try new technology, try new practices, without the uncomfortable burden of, am I going to lose my farm if I try these new practices? So it's a comfort level, it's a relationship building mechanism, and it's a way to try new conservation measures without the potential risk that one might perceive. I would mention too that of these groups in last year, 2022, through the incentives that money is spent on with landowners, we are trying to track how much phosphorus is being reduced by keeping that phosphorus in soil on the landscape. It prevents it from getting into their surface waters and eventually coming down to Lakes Tainer and Renoma. And we're last year alone with the funds that were available, we had about 489 pounds of phosphorus reduced just from 3,000 acres of cover crops. About 2,600 pounds of phosphorus reduced from about 3,600 acres of no-till. So just those two alone, the pounds of phosphorus that are being reduced, in some perspectives, points of view, it's not a lot, but it goes back to the point of the amount of resources needed to achieve a little step is sometimes tremendous. The Red Cedar Demonstration Farm, I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. It's on the north side of the county government center, over by the neighbors. It is, the picture on the left is prior to when some changes took place on the demo farm. So it was prior to actually being a demo farm, and it was basically operated by a private landlord, private farmer. Since then, partnership between Dunn County, NRCS, UW Extension, CBTC, Valley Technical College have come together to create a soil health type of cropping rotation and implementing conservation practices to what we believe are key to addressing water quality and resource concerns in the community. Another program that we have in our department is a non-metallic mine reclamation ordinance. So back in around the year 2000, the state legislature required that all counties adopt a non-metallic mining reclamation ordinance. They had no choice. And in some instances, some local municipalities did not want to bear the burden of this type of activity. But in a lot of ways, it's good. This is looking at sand pit, and prior to this rule coming into effect, an operator of a sand and gravel pit could just walk away and leave it the way it is when they're done. The point of the reclamation plan, the reclamation code, is to try to put that land back. It's intended to put that land back to a more stable situation that is beneficial for a number of different resource concerns. We spend about 3% of our time, it's about 28% of one staff person's time administering this program on about 20 pits in Dunn County. And this is just an example of the start of some reclamation after that previous slide, after that mining was ceased. Our Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, this is a partnership with our federal partners in FSA and NRCS. It looks at, it's basically intended to take land out of production that's near surface water and other resource concerns and put it into buffers, whether that's plants, grasses, native vegetation, or trees. We have our Ninth Creek PL 566 program. So in the late 50s, early 60s, federal law started installing through the federal law 566, started installing flood control structures around the country. Primarily in Wisconsin, most of these are in the driftless area. In Dunn County, we have 3 flood control structures, rather large, and we are obligated to maintain them to help protect the Ninth Creek watershed, which is over in Weston Township. We have an equipment rental program. We rent out a number of different pieces of equipment to help get conservation on land. We have tree planting machines, hand planting, tree planting bars, soil sampling probes, a no-till drill, straw mulcher, no-till drill, more information here. Basically, we rent that out to landowners to get cover on the ground, to keep soil from being bare for basically half of the year. We also have an education outreach program. So the picture on the left is many years ago, but is our land management, or excuse me, our land, what's the name of it? It's basically a soil judging contest or a land judging contest with high school students. And they're going out and looking at the soil profile, looking at the landscape around it, and trying to apply what they learned in school. On the right is our poster contest as well. So we do poster contests for all kinds of grades. Red Cedar Water Quality Partnership, another big one to talk about. This is where we talk about Lakes Tanner and Manila. This is the plan on your right here, our 9 key element watershed implementation plan that looks at how do we address the phosphorus loading of Lakes Tanner and Manila. And as many people like to say, trying to not make it green, which we can have a longer conversation about that, and we don't have time right now. But the map in the middle is all the 303 delisted or impaired waters within Dunn County, surface waters. So our work is intended to address the resource concerns that are created in those waters. Real quick, the top graph is the total phosphorus levels below the dam here in Menominee, the Red Cedar River. You can see they're trending downward recently. And on the graph on the bottom is the nitrate trend at the dam below Menominee. So in general, we feel like phosphorus is improving, but we have a nitrate issue as well. So other nutrients that we have to be concerned about. And if anything, this helps stress the importance of land use management, and that it's total land use management. So looking at the source of this nitrate, is it coming from groundwater? And is it because groundwater contaminated from land use or other impacts?
Jason, What year were we on the peak on the phosphorus? What year?
That's about 2010. This next slide is looking at groundwater. So I personally have a strong interest in groundwater. Not that I don't think surface water is important; it is equally important. But I think surface water has received a ton of attention. That's why all these rules came into effect, was around surface water, and groundwater has tend to have taken the back seat at times, but not recently. As many of you may be aware, I think groundwater is a hot topic the last probably 10 years for sure. The map on the left is the well water viewer for the state of Wisconsin. If you're in yellow, that means the average well tests, private well tests for nitrate are between 5 and 10 parts per million. Natural background levels of nitrate in our water in the state of Wisconsin is around 1 part per million. So anything above 1 is impacted, is caused because of humans. So whether that is how we're managing the land, whether that's agriculture, whether that's other things that we're doing in the state of Wisconsin, the studies and all the research has shown that about 90% of that nitrate in our groundwater is coming from agriculture. And that is something that is a hard conversation to have and tough to accept at times, but that's part of our job, is to talk about those tough things and try to find solutions for that. The map on the right is particularly of Dunn County, and this is Dunn County's specific well water viewer. So you can go to our county website, look up at this well water viewer. You can zoom in and out and look at different components in different areas of the county. One thing I'll mention, we are in the midst of about to fully implement a private well monitoring program that's going to sample 1,000 wells across the county through the months of May and June. That was funding sourced through the county board, felt it was a priority to use some of the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA funds, that the county received to implement this program. And I think it's a valuable program to try to look at trends across the county, look at areas where maybe we need to focus our efforts from a land use standpoint. There's a whole lot of lists of other programs up here. I mentioned earlier on that some of them may have a hard time making their connection to conservation. But there is a component of all of these, and that's people, and that's relationship building. And I think of anything that I've learned in this work is that is probably the most important component of all this. We can have all the rules we want. We can have all kinds of good intentions, but unless we can make a connection with the local individuals that have to implement the change, we're not going to get very far. Oh yeah, the list goes on. The last one on there, real quick, well, there's a couple on there. The Red Sea to Watershed Conference, certainly an important component, but then also public health. And bringing it back to people, why do we do all of this? Why do we have all the conservation discussions? Why do we have the agri-performance standards? Certainly there's benefits to the economy. There's benefits to individual, profitability. There's benefits to the community in a number of ways for a robust society. But if we don't have public health, none of that matters. So these rules all tie back to what we're doing that impact all of us humans. And Steve mentioned it earlier. So the Community Health Needs Assessment report that was talked about. That is one of our main partners and is a growing partnership across the state, is the connection between land and water conservation divisions and local public health departments. What are we doing on the land that impacts public health? So when we talk about private wells, for example, or transient non-community wells, so that rural church or that rural tavern or that rural business that serves multiple people, if they don't have safe water, why don't they have safe water? And what connection does that go back to the landscape? And typically the public health see a few documents here at the bottom. The conundrum of, talk about groundwater, for example. Where's the nitrate coming from? We're real quick to point fingers, right? And it could be any one of those sources, or it could be something else. In response to that, in response to the groundwater movement recently, both my experience in Pepin County and certainly prior to me coming in Dunn County, we experienced livestock moratoriums, trying to get a handle on what the impacts of large-scale livestock operations are in the county and how they are impacting our resources. I learned a lot because I did that whole report for Pepin County and lived through the challenges and the discussions of those conversations that we had. And while I can think back and at the time they were not enjoyable, where land and water conservation finds itself is sometimes right in the middle. Actually, almost every time it's right in the middle of all the differing points of view and different perspectives. And we have to do a good job of being, again, building those relationships and trying to understand everyone's point of view to build a shared understanding of an issue. And the moratoriums, I think, while not enjoyable at the time per se, do have value. I wouldn't encourage anybody to go want to adopt a moratorium today for something else. But the point is it makes us, I felt it made me better. You can't make diamonds without pressure. And when you're put in the hot seat to answer questions by concerned citizens, you have to know your material and you have to be able to either find a response, find an answer, or help develop an answer with everyone involved. And that's where I think we find ourselves today on a number of things. So this slide, I've used this in the past, especially going through those years of moratoriums, trying to get a handle on groundwater quality and the impacts. But just the other considerations and challenges that we have that are in some ways beyond our control. Some of the big ones here is like, it's always talked about you need to feed the world. And there's a lot of perspectives and points of view where that's valid. And being able to understand that is important when we try to talk about the impacts that thought process has locally. And that's where land and water conservation departments find themselves, is how do we balance that point of view of we need to feed the entire world versus maintaining public health and safe drinking water here locally. I think there's a number of solutions that everyone can jump to right away. But one thing that I think we all can agree is that there's no silver bullet for any of this. These are wicked problems. There is, situations that landowners have to deal with. For example, if they are at an age where they no longer want a dairy farm, they can't handle the cows anymore, but they're not so removed from the agricultural world, they want to stay connected. What happens to all the cropping that they have when the cows go away? We went from a rotation that had sod in rotation, had alfalfa in rotation, maybe even cattle on the landscape, grazing pasture, to a market, a default, commodity market where it's corn and soybeans. And that's where we find ourselves today, is trying to find that balance of does it have to be that? Some individuals are at the mercy of that market. They're at the mercy of, there is nothing else for them to do other than to grow corn and soybeans. And that can have a tremendous impact on our resource. And I think this goes into bigger issues that we probably don't want to necessarily cover today, but it's a reality of what we deal with, our partners deal with on a daily basis, of trying to find this balance of protections and conservation locally with the points of view and perspectives that individuals have from an economic standpoint, and just trying to make a living in the landscape. With all that said, we have a priority farm strategy. We are required to have one part of our land and water resource management plan. And I would tell you that if I cannot say that we implement this every day in that order. It just doesn't happen. We have good intentions, we have good goals that lay out how we want to address conservation and put it on the landscape. But every day we come into the office and the phone rings and it's a different issue. It's something different. And we get pulled in thousands of different directions, which even in your personal lives, you probably maybe feel the same way. But when given the opportunity, this is our strategy to try to implement conservation in Dunn County. All right, next 5 years. So, these next 5 years is actually, within that time frame, we'll have to update our land and water resource management plan again. We'll have to seek public input as to what are the resource concerns for Dunn County and how do we want to address them. So citizen engagement is constant, but will also be an important factor at that time. Implementing that 9 key element plan or the watershed plan for Red Cedar Watershed, producer-led groups, and the list goes on here of things that are coming up. There are emerging programs too, things that have been around not that long that Dunn County may find themselves in. Water quality trading being one of them. Looking at projects that we can work with municipalities to offset some of those phosphorus and other contamination issues. So I guess parting words and some optimism, as I mentioned in the beginning, is the land and water conservation departments and divisions across the state play a unique role in the implementation of conservation, and almost I would argue, a critical role. If it isn't for us, it would be a lot harder for our partners to implement some of the needed changes and the needed programming within the state. So the support that we get from all of our partners, from all of our elected officials, is appreciated, and we're always looking for more. But that's the world that we live in, right? Everyone needs more money, everyone needs more staff, everyone needs more of everything. We always want more. And at some point, depending on the values and the shared understanding, and the perspectives, and all the relationships that we have in Dunn County, we're going to be probably in the mix of it, in the middle of it, trying to sort it all out. So, I think what we're going to continue to do, and some of the successes that we've had with particularly our agricultural community, that is one of the largest land uses in the area, in the county. That's where we find ourselves working the most. They have the largest impact on our resources. We're making great strides with nutrient management coverage, meeting tolerable soil loss, farmer-led groups trying new things, trying to implement new things. So my optimism, I'm optimistic. I think I always try to be that way, even though some days are quite depressing. But I think the reality is that we have a ton of work to do. This work will never end. But we can do good things and make change in a short amount of time with the right approach and the right people involved. And that takes everybody. Trying to build that shared understanding of an issue is probably the most important part of it, but I think we can do it. One thing that I did not get training on going through school was I did not ever anticipate being a sociologist or a psychologist, but that's where we find ourselves too. I have to give a presentation Monday night to my high school's honors banquet, so I've been asked to be a guest speaker. So I'm preparing this presentation and a presentation for them and trying to make connections and trying to use some of the same slides so I don't have to create new ones. But that is one of the things that I want to stress to them, is just the importance of people and building relationships and keeping an open mind, trying to understand everyone's point of view, and hopefully that will get them further in life. Because I think it's helped me. I think it helped me get to where I am today. And I think it's an important part of how we approach conservation in Dunn County. So I talk longer than I planned. But I'd be happy to have a conversation, answer questions, try to answer questions. So that's it, Steve.
Tuesday is Conservation Lobby Day. Nothing else. What would you like me to ask our representative?
Well, stick with the theme that we in the Land and Water Conservation Departments have been saying for a lot of years. I'm on the board of directors for the state association, the Wisconsin Land and Water Conservation Association, and you know, we have been working hard for many years, going back to that staffing formula of funding the staffing formula, funding local land conservation. In the last probably 2 budget cycles, we've made more strides in support of that than we ever have. And this year's ask for this current budget cycle is full funding of that staffing. In the past, we've hesitated to ask for too much. You know, if you ask for too much, then they're going to not give you any at all. And we'd always ask for what we thought they would give us, and then we get half of that. You know, so the state has come together on that front and said, ask for full funding for local land conservation. And that full funding formula, it helps support the staff, and it can help offset the local levy, and the local resources that we need when counties are strapped for those resources right now. With levy limit laws and things like that, we get thinner and thinner every day. If I get any thinner, I will blow away.
Is full funding for each county different for each county?
Yes.
What is it for Dunn County? Full funding.
So full funding, if you were to fund it based on the formula, so that'd be the 100, 70, 50, and then 50% for every subsequent position, I believe is around $600,000.
The governor, he was has a budget. Is that full funding in that budget?
My understanding is it is, yeah.
So then what he should ask is Moses and staff should follow the year's budget.
Yep, it's in joint finance's hands right now, so, yep.
Someone fell.
Yeah, Steve?
You know, I really appreciate what you presented. I learned a lot. And I got a lot of appreciation of what's going on. Dick Lamers has started Red Cedar Watershed Conference, 11, 12 years ago? And I've been back here for about 5 years in Chippewa Valley, and I've attended that. You want to learn a lot more, go to one of those. I would encourage you to do that. The one thing that I was listening to Chase that came to my mind is, and Tom raised a good point about the budget. Regulations that are help doing what these people are trying to do. So we as a society, we need to speak up, just as Tom said, and follow these budgets to help this happen. And the other thing is, there's a lot of things we can do as citizens. Real tiny ways, just, volunteer. And I would, health done right. There's 5 areas that you can help it. Environment is one. But there's 11. I would encourage you to go on health done right. Done is the health done right. And look at those 5 groups and say, could I do something with anyone else? And I assume those here today are really maybe more environmentally focused, but you may have something else that needs more to you. And I would encourage you, talk with your friends over coffee or lunch somebody else. And, or they think, well, what can I do? But we can do something as an individual. So I would encourage you to just talk with a little conscience and control and say, you know what? Can I do something else? Because we need, when I say we, I'm talking about the Lord, we need this type of stuff to happen that Chase is talking about. So that's just my, you're presenting this aroused.
Yeah, I would just add that, you mentioned that there's tremendous partnerships between state agencies, federal agencies, local, I mean, we couldn't do it, none of us could do it individually. It has to be collective. And I think sometimes, you know, certainly we get points of view that are expressed to us of, why don't you guys take care of this? Like, why is that lake not clean? The state and the county has done nothing for this lake, or things like that. And it's, certainly we play a key, our office, the county, DNR, NRCS, everyone plays a key role, and probably a larger role to some degree, depending on the situation. But unless we all have a shared understanding, unless we all come together for the greater good of it, you know, I think that's part of, you know, alluding to the Red Cedar Conference, is a lot of the work that's been done, and so many other partners and people I failed to mention, but it's all of us, and those that come to us and say, why aren't you working on this? I'd love to have those conversations, because I can talk another hour, you know. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, so that sort of education section of life that's right over by the judicial center?
Mhm. Yep, the demonstration farm?
Yes, it is.
Yep.
What happens to all of the product that is working?
So the main operator of that farm is the Chippewa Valley Technical College, the agronomy students. We as the county, NRCS, extension, play advisory roles and kind of how we want to see it farm, like the bigger goals, the bigger picture of it. But CBTC and their students are basically farming it, so they take care of lining up equipment, buying seed, hauling their commodity to market, selling it, all that stuff. So they're operating as if it was an actual farm. So all the corn, beans, oats that are on there eventually get hauled to, just like most other commodity grain farming here would go to some sort of elevator somewhere, and go into the system as what corn and beans typically do. Actually, that ends up being mostly livestock feed. So.
How many acres is that farm, the demonstration farm? How
Yeah, I
many-
think it's, what is it, 113, something like that. So, there's a portion that's owned by the city, and then there's a portion that's over by, where the road that goes into the Dunn highway shop. There's some fields there. So it's about 80 on the west side of the road, so.
At 100, the jail, 100 had our farms there, so they still have it?
Yeah, that's right behind their facility, so it's not incorporated with these fields.
And then there's the jail, food court, whoever makes the meals, for the people in jail, do they use that from their garden?
That's a good question. I haven't been in Dunn County long enough to know those answers, but I think there's some connection there.
I think that, I don't know if it goes to directly feed, the people in the jail, but I know that it also gets donated to stepping stones. I'm not sure exactly how that. So I don't have specific details, but it does not go to these.
It's a common thought. I mean, it's one that I've had. I don't know if I mentioned it before. I co-chair a statewide working group known as Health and Conservation Work Group. So it's a fairly recent, in the last few years, development of making that connection between public health and conservation. And that topic has come up. Typically, that level of health is somewhat different than public health departments per se. I mean, certainly there's nurses and things involved, but it's a different world, I guess, to some degree. But I've asked the same questions of my pediatrician for my kids, and if you live in a rural area, put treatment on your letter. But we know that only goes so far too. So yeah, I think it's a very valid point, and it's one that maybe with time and people speaking up, patients asking those questions, it may rise to a higher level. But certainly, Department of Health Services, toxicologists with the state of Wisconsin are making particularly nitrate connections to other forms of ill health effects beyond why the standard of 10 parts per million has been made. That was for methemoglobinemia, which is basically for blue baby syndrome, pregnant women and infants, and there are connections to nitrates for longer exposure to all of us. So.
Are there PFAS in the city Menominee water system? And are there PFAS been found in any of the private wells in downtown?
So the water monitoring program that I mentioned earlier, the 1,000 samples that we're about to collect, a portion of that was sampling all the town halls within the county. And because the expense of the monitoring for PFAS, we aren't able to do it on all 1,000 wells, but we were able to do it on the town wells. And I will say that PFAS is present. We are just getting some results back now, trying to develop outreach education as part of this whole effort. Nothing is above what the current standards are as far as health standards, but it is present. As far as the city goes, they monitor for that, and the last time we checked, there was not any concern for that in the municipal wells for the city. But rurally, and I think the more you read on that stuff, it's everywhere. And then we're bound, once you start looking for it, you're going to find it. It's just a matter of how much you're going to find. So right now, we're not finding it in levels that, even with the proposed new standards that the EPA is releasing, lowering the level for public health issues or effects, the results that we're getting are still below that. But it is present. So.
Do you have any idea what causes that in rural areas or any? I know, clearly that because of the fire departments they use at the airport to practice drills for fire. But like in rural areas, downtown or farm areas, do you have any idea what would cause of what they're using that fire?
Sure. Certainly, there's a number of potential sources, but honestly, the source is on my clothes right now. Probably, it's on anything if it's water repellent or your carpet from like Scotchgard. PFAS is in all of that stuff, so it can come from a number of places. And when you pull a water sample, there's a very strict protocol that our staff did to make sure that it didn't contaminate the sample. So there was a blank sample that was run, basically opening a cap, pouring another plain water into this one, closing it, just from the effects that might be coming off of the person. From a land use standpoint, land application, I mentioned earlier my experience with land application of known frontier to many and unknown to a lot more. Anything else? Thank you for your time.